I earned this seat, and I will not be treated as if I don't belong." Her voice cut through the cabin, firm yet trembling with the weight of injustice. "Would you ask anyone else to prove their worth? Or is it only people like me?" The attendant's reply was cold, wrapped in the sterile armor of procedure and policy. The air thickened, passengers froze, their breaths caught, their eyes locked on the confrontation that had stripped away all pretense of civility. And the question lingered in the silence. When rules clash with truth, who decides what justice truly looks like? But then, an unexpected turn silenced the entire cabin. You have a choice too. Do you agree with how she acted? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like this channel so the story spreads further. The terminal at John F. Kennedy bustled with summer families and business travelers, all speaking of barbecues, fireworks, and long weekends. The air smelled faintly of brewed coffee and pretzels, and the line at the cafe near Gate B shimmered with small courtesies. A door held open for a stranger, a thank you murmured after a barista slid a paper cup across the counter. On Delta Flight 247 to Los Angeles, the first-class cabin glowed with soft amber light. Leather seats waited in tidy rows, and the hush was a particular quiet of people settling into their own small worlds. Into seat 1, slipped a woman in a slate blazer, a silk scarf the color of dusk at her collar, the unhurried composure of someone who had learned to ignore the curious. Her name was Dr. Maya Johnson. She placed a folded newspaper in the side pocket, rested small-toed beneath her feet, and took a slow breath as if sealing herself inside a calm that could withstand turbulence of any kind. Some tickets are more than paper, she thought. More than ink and timing and barcodes. Some are keys that open doors no one expects. Boarding continued in a pleasant stream. A gray-haired couple compared barbecue rub recipes for Independence Day. A man in a baseball cap bragged softly about his grandson's little league swing. A flight attendant with a steady gait of experience. Jessica Miller moved along the aisle, offering the polished smile of someone who could see the senator and soothe a toddler in the same hour. She greeted a lawyer she recognized as William Carter, nodded to a marketing executive, Lisa Brown, who tucked a tablet into her bag, and thanked a frequent flyer named David Thompson, who tipped the lounge attendant generously before boarding. When her eyes returned to seat 1A, the smile did not fade, but something behind it stilled. Jessica paused, checked a manifest, then angled toward the window side where, "Maya, Saturday, welcome aboard," she said, the words gracious, the tone measured. "I hope you were comfortable." Her hand hovered politely. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Maya unfolded the small rectangle and offered it without comment. The ink confirmed what the seat already said. 1A, nonstop to Los Angeles. Jessica's gaze flicked to the name, back to the passenger, then to the boarding pass once more, as if the letters might rearrange themselves under her attention. "Thank you," she said, returning it. "We sometimes have last-minute upgrades, and well, just making sure." The smile returned, identical and impersonal, and Jessica moved 2 rows back to adjust the coat in an overhead bin. Maya rested her hands on the armrests, feeling the quiet of her pulse. The cabin soundtrack of Everyday America resumed. A soft joke about long security lines, a request for sparkling water, someone debating whether to watch a western or a documentary. A toddler in economy let out an experimental yelp that provoked 2 rows of laughter and then silence. Outside the porthole the wind gleamed. Beyond it the runway baked in the heat. Maya looked at the newspaper headline without reading it, tracing the margin with her thumb. Jessica returned with a tray of pre-departure drinks. She offered champagne to William and a club soda to Lisa, who thanked her and mentioned a late-night deadline. When she reached 1A, she set a glass of water on Maya's tray with perfect balance. "May I see a government ID as well?" she asked, keeping her voice low, private, almost gentle. Maya's eyes lifted. They were warm, but they were steady. Of course. She produced the wallet, opening it so that the photo and name were visible. Nothing hidden, nothing made theatrical. Jessica leaned in. The comparison was swift and perfunctory. The silence after it was longer than the task demanded. She straightened, nodded, and the smile twitched as though it had briefly lost its footing. The jet pushed back. Safety procedures unfurled in practiced cadence. Buckles clicked, seatbacks rose, and the plane lifted into the pale blue of a New York afternoon. As the climb smoothed into a long, even hum, Maya unfolded her newspaper at last and read the first paragraph twice without taking it in. She could feel the attention that dare not name itself light as dust, present as breath. The man across the aisle glanced at her, then at the call button, then at his shoes. Lisa touched the edge of her tablet and did not turn it on. Jessica came again, professional and poised, and crouched slightly so her eye line met the passenger's. "I appreciate your patience," she said. "We occasionally see irregularities on this route, and my job is to ensure that our first-class service is reserved for those who qualify." There was no accusation in the grammar, only in the arrangement of emphasis. Maya folded the newspaper and set it aside. "Are you asking if I qualify?" she said, no more loudly than before. "Just verifying," Jessica replied. If you have a frequent flyer card or proof of status, it helps me know things correctly. The tone was almost apologetic, the words almost kind, almost. A leather wallet opened. A metal card with a matte finish caught the cabin light and reflected it as a muted sheen. Jessica's eyes dipped to it, and then away as if brightness offended. "Thank you," she said briskly, and stood. The smile this time did not quite reach her eyes. She moved on to help a man in row 3 stow a bag, and to offer a blanket to a woman with a stiff neck, all with unfaltering efficiency. Yet the quiet near 1A grew heavier, like the hush before a piano's first note in the recital hall. The first-class galley whispered with the sounds of coffee. The aroma drifted down the aisle, and a gentleman a row behind Maya asked for his with cream and no sugar, then added a soft thank you when the cup arrived. He slipped a couple folded bills beneath the napkin, a small, old-fashioned gesture of gratitude, even when the airline policy said it was unnecessary. Maya watched the exchange with a calm that was almost fond. Courtesy, when it appears, is its own kind of announcement. Conversation bubbled gently. A producer returning from location shoot. A grandmother excited to see her daughter in Pasadena. A young couple comparing plans for a coastal drive. The country, in miniature, crossed 3,000 miles in polite increments. No one spoke of anything dramatic. No one ever does, until the moment when someone has to. When Jessica approached for the 3rd time, she brought no tray and no smile. She had the grace of someone who believed in procedure more than she believed in people. And in that conviction, there was certainty enough to power an airplane. She stopped at the armrest, hands folded, and if anyone else noticed the stillness, they did not say so. "I'm going to ask you one more time to confirm your details," she said softly. "We have had issues with counterfeit passes. I'm sure you understand." Maya lifted her gaze and held it. There was no anger in it, only the quiet resistance of a person who had spent years translating doubt into patience. "You have seen my pass," she said. "You have seen my identification. You have my name." Jessica's chin rose by a fraction. "I do," she answered, "and I have my responsibility. Don't." The hum of the engine seemed to gather in the spaces between words. William Carter closed the cover of his book. Lisa Brown, whose work demanded reading people for a living, watched the attendant's posture shift toward insistence. David Thompson adjusted his seatbelt, the simple gesture of someone bracing for something he could not yet name. Far behind the curtain, a baby laughed again, and then the sound was gone. Maya lifted her glass of water, took a sip, and returned it to the ring of condensation on the tray table. Her hands were steady. Her voice, when it came, would have suited a radio host at midnight. Low, warm, measured for listeners who preferred their stories without sharp edges. "Is there anything else you need from me?" she asked. Jessica's gaze made a small calculation that never reached her mouth. She glanced at the brass number on the bulkhead, at the passengers who pretended to look away, at the white fabric of the headrest cover with its neat embroidered logo. The plane flew on through a clear sky, leveling into its long arc westward. The afternoon light burned to honey, and the cabin seemed, for a held breath, like a stage with its curtain 1 inch from rising. Across the aisle, William cleared his throat, found it unnecessary, and looked out the window instead. Lisa tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and pressed her lips together in a private line of thought. The scent of coffee yielded to the clean citrus note of a warm towel. The small rituals continue because that is what small rituals do. They keep time even when the larger clock stops. Jessica leaned slightly closer. The softness in her voice returned, not as mercy but as a layer of control. "This seat is usually reserved for special guests. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Jessica's last question lingered like a draft in a close room, the kind of chill that made people adjust their collars without knowing why. The first-class cabin has settled into its practiced hush. Screens glow with maps and movies, eyes chime softly in short glasses, and the aisle lights painted a pale runway for the occasional trip to the galley. The plane had risen above the clouds and leveled, a smooth glide toward the long arc west. Conversations thinned into the private rhythm of travel, but the words at seat 1A left their echo. "Are you sure you are in the right place?" floating just above the 10 headrests, as present as the hum of the engines. Maya kept her hands folded on the armrest. The skin at her knuckles showed the faint impressions of her rings, and when she flexed her fingers, the marks faded slowly, as if remembering to be blood and not metal. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth, and let her eyes rest on the oval of sky at her left. The wing caught sunlight and threw it back like a promise. She did not look at Jessica. There was no advantage in meeting a gaze that wanted confirmation more than truth. Across the aisle, William Carter slid a bookmark into a hardcover and closed it with deliberate care, as though loud motion might set off something neither of them wanted. 2 rows back, Lisa Brown rested her elbow on the armrest, her phone face down in her lap, the posture of someone who had learned not to miss the quiet signals in a room. David Thompson scrolled half-heartedly through a news app and then locked the screen, his expression the mild frown of a man who liked problems better when they declared themselves in numbers. The galley breathed out the scent of fresh coffee. and the flight attendant in the blue apron emerged carrying a small tray with creamers and sugar packets and a neat stack of white cups. Jessica followed a moment later, empty-handed, with the measured stride of someone who had decided to be efficient about a thing that was not quite covered by a checklist. She stopped beside a businessman in 1C, adjusted the angle of his reading light, and exchanged a quick, professional line about how the glare could catch on glossy pages. The man thanked her, the old way, with his whole face. Then Jessica turned and came to 1A. Her voice was toned to privacy. "If you do not mind," she said, "I would like to confirm one more detail. We sometimes see irregularities, especially on busy holiday weeks." 9A. Maya's gaze moved from the window to the attendant's name pin. The letters were spare, unadorned. Jessica Miller. A name like a straight line. She nodded once. What would help? "A loyalty number," Jessica said, "or the specific card that the ticket was booked with. It is a routine step. I will be quick." The words sat nicely, and yet something pricked in their corners, like starch in a shirt that had been ironed too hard. Maya's wallet opened with a quiet seam of leather. She revealed the card that carried her name in raised letters and handed it over without show. Jessica glanced at the color and style first, not the name, then at the embossed characters, then at Maya's face. The pause that followed was thinner than a breath and somehow longer than a thought. "Thank you," Jessica said, returning it. "You would not believe how many people try to well." She smiled a small, tired smile that implied long experience with corners of human nature no one likes to sweep. "We appreciate your patience." Maya inclined her head. She did not say that patience is a muscle, and some people live with it, waited every day. She reached for her water, brought it to her lips, and tasted the coolness that airline ice never fully gives. On the bulkhead, the route map traced a patient line. Someone behind her coughed politely, the kind that asked forgiveness for having lungs. Near the curtain that divided the cabins, a toddler's laugh rose and fell like a silver thread, and then vanished. A gentle jostle of activity stirred the aisle. The older couple from earlier discussed fireworks at a park in Queens and whether the grandchildren could stay up long enough to see the finale. A man in a polo shirt asked, in a voice that hoped for yes, whether the galley had decaf with a mild roast. When the blue apron attendant brought it, he slipped a bill beneath the napkin, a modest gesture for a service that technically did not accept it. Beside the window, sunlight deepened to a honeyed tone that made the seat fabric look warmer than it was. Jessica stood with one hand on the back of the seat ahead, eyes flicking between the aisle and Maya, as if managing two flights at once. Her diction when she spoke again was careful, as if she were placing silverware on the cloth and did not wish to scratch the table. "I want to make sure we hold our standards," she said. "First class is a promise. It is for a certain kind of traveler." Maya let a pause happen, not to punish, simply to allow the sentence to be fully itself. "A certain kind," she repeated, "not in challenge, only in precision." Jessica nodded, relieved to have her phrasing mirrored. Business owners, leaders, people who travel often enough to understand the expectations. She lowered her voice on the last word, as though the expectations were not simply printed in the brochure, but lived in the way one reached for a glass, or asked for a blanket, or signaled a need without pressing a button. From 2A, William's eyes lifted. The habit of a courtroom had taught him to observe without interrupting, but a muscle in his jaw made a small decision of its own. He reached into his jacket pocket and turned on a recorder app, the action discreet as a sigh. Lisa followed the exchange with the focused stillness of people who work with brands and understand how a single sentence can tilt an entire room. Her thumb stroked the edge of her tablet case, a steadying metronome. David watched the attendant's posture change by degrees, the way a graph inched upward in the space of a quarter. Jessica leaned in fractionally. "You would be surprised," she said, "how often someone tries to sit where he or she has not earned the right to be." The smile dropped away from her mouth like a leaf that had been waiting to fall. "It puts us in a difficult position. We want to be welcoming. We also have to protect the integrity of this cabin." The words landed with polite softness and a hard edge, like a paper napkin wrapped around cutlery. Maya placed both palms flat on the armrests. Her eyes were calm. Her voice, when they arrived, had the late-night warmth of a broadcaster keeping insomniacs company, measured and without burr. "You have my boarding pass," she said. "You have my identification. You have my card. You have my name. What is it that you need to know?" Jessica exhaled through her nose, a small sound, almost a laugh, and not quite. "Sometimes it is not about what is on paper," she said. "Sometimes you can just tell when a person is not." She saw the word and did not complete the sentence. The unspoken slipped into the space and sat down. A gentle turbulence lifted and dropped the cabin, and the overhead bins responded with a soft clack. People glanced up and then settled. A warm towel service began, the citrus note clean and welcoming. The plane pressed onward through a world of air that looked like nothing from the window and felt like everything under the skin. Lisa, who had spent her career avoiding unnecessary conflagrations in public spaces, tipped her chin toward Jessica and said in a voice not meant to carry, "Maybe we could let people enjoy the flight." It was an invitation to step back with dignity. Jessica's smile returned, tight at the corners. "Of course," she said. "That is what I am trying to ensure." Even as she pivoted to the galley and returned within a minute with a small clipboard and a form that looked official, mostly because paper can do that under the right light. "If you would just sign here to confirm your understanding of our first-class policy," she said, "we can be certain there is no confusion later." William blinked once. He had not seen that form before, and he traveled enough to know the standard liturgy. David's eyebrows lifted by a fraction. An investor's tell that a term sheet did not match the meeting. Maya looked at the page. It contained general language about seating and the airline's right to move passengers in operational exigencies, written in a careful fog of legal habit. There was no place on that form for dignity, their seldom island. She did not reach for the pen. She did not refuse either. "I am happy to read this," she said. "I will need a few minutes." "Oh. It is straightforward," Jessica replied. "A quick signature is all we need." "Then a quick read will match it," Maya said, not unkindly. Jessica's lips thinned. The smile disappeared fully now, not replaced by anything. Her eyes shifted to the empty seat behind Maya and then to the galley, as if she were checking for a witness who might agree with her. The plane's lights dimmed one notch for the afternoon movie. On several screens, a landscape unfurled in wide, bright color, a reminder that the world could be simple if only it were shot from far enough away. "On routes like this," Jessica said, the politeness shrinking by a shade, "we see people who think a little luck will carry them into places they do not belong. They step in because there is a spare pillow and a nicer glass, and they imagine no one will notice." She glanced, just briefly, at the cabin door where a curtain hid the route to economy. "Some people think a little luck is all it takes to slip into this cabin." The sentence did not explode. It landed softly, as if it expected applause. And in the hush that followed, something shifted that could not be measured by an instrument. William's recorder caught the words with the same neutrality it would grant to birdsong. Lisa's hand stopped stroking the tablet case. David's shoulders tightened, then eased, the body's small arithmetic of surprise. Maya's posture did not change. She looked at Jessica for a count that would have been a single heartbeat for a runner and two for someone at rest. The engines hummed. A baby giggled and then hiccuped. The sky at the window was a deep, clean blue with no horizon visible. Maya lifted her head, met Jessica's eyes, and said slowly, "What are you implying?" The question hung between them, quiet as frost on a window, and for a long breath, no one moved. The plane held a steady course. The cabin lights softened the shade, and the seatback map stitched a neat blue line across the country as if a stitching needle were passing through the fabric of the afternoon. Maya did not look away. She waited, not to trap the flight attendant, but to offer room for sense to walk back into the conversation. Around them, the small orchestra of first-class life continued. The gentle clink of ice in short glasses, the soft rip of a magazine page turned, a cough covered by a napkin, the rustle of a blanket drawn over tired knees. William Carter shifted in 2A with the composure of someone who knew that words once spoken could not be called back. His thumb hovered above the screen of his phone, a quiet decision waiting to be made. Lisa Brown sat still in 3B, hands folded, the picture of a traveler who had seen enough boardrooms to recognize when a line was about to be crossed. David Thompson breathed in, breathed out, and set his empty glass on the coaster with care, the gesture of a man who kept order where he could. Jessica Miller's reply arrived with a smoothness that suggested practice. "I am implying nothing at all," she said, though her gaze lingered a fraction too long. "I am making sure standards are upheld. There are expectations in this cabin, and my responsibility is to preserve them." She glanced at the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the aircraft, as if it were a shoreline that needed guarding. It happens more often than you think. Someone finds an empty seat, or swaps a pass at the last minute, and then a difficult situation falls to us to manage. It is not a difficult situation when the paperwork is in order," Maya said. Her voice warm and low, the kind of voice that could keep company through a long night drive on an AM station. "It is simply a seat, not simply," Jessica answered, softer. "These seats are a promised service, quiet, professionalism. They are for travelers who understand what that means." She smiled in a way that did not quite travel to her eyes. "I am sure you understand." Oh, beyond the window, afternoon light turned the wing the color of pale brass. The plane rode a cushion of air so even that the cabin felt almost detached from motion. A gentleman in a knit cardigan unfolded a newspaper, smoothed the crease with his palm, and began the crossword from the bottom up, his pencil making a patient whisper as it crossed boxes. From behind the curtain floated the sing-song cadence of a parent entertaining a toddler. the words indistinct and kind. Maya held her breath long enough to let silence do its small work. Then she exhaled and said, I have given you what you asked for. What is missing for you? Sometimes documentation is not the whole story, Jessica said. It helps to speak with a supervisor. Perhaps we should move you to another seat while I verify a detail or two. It will spare you attention. The last sentence was offered like a kindness. It was not one. Maya's eyes slid briefly to the open space across the aisle. I am comfortable where I am, she said, and I am not concerned about attention. Jessica's fingers tapped the top of the aisle seat once, twice, as if testing whether wood was still wood. She studied the neat stitch at the corner of Maya's headrest cover, then the polished toe of her own shoe, then the faces of passengers who pretended to look elsewhere. We occasionally encounter people who assume rules do not apply to them, she observed. It is delicate, but it is real. Hi. Lisa's chin lifted half an inch. She did not speak. The older gentleman with the crossword raised his eyes to the aisle but kept his pencil moving, a small act of politeness that also recorded the moment. William's phone, resting now on his knee, showed a bright red dot that meant memory was being made. David's brows knit, then smoothed, and he folded his hands like a man preparing to sit with a problem longer than he wished. I hear you, Maya said. I am not one of those people. Well, Jessica offered. It is not always visible. You can tell. In other ways. In tone. In how someone reacts when asked to cooperate. In attitude. We are trained to see what paper cannot say. Her voice took on a careful shape, each word set down as evenly as silverware on linen. We also look at fit. A passing ripple, like a breath taken by the plane itself, made the glasses on the tray table nod. The galley sighed with the fragrance of coffee, and a blue apron attendant stepped out to refill a cup, asking, in the gentle cadence of service, if cream or milk would be preferred. A folded bill slid beneath the napkin in a quiet exchange. The old American way of appreciation, where policy does not always reach. The scent of citrus rose as warm towels were offered on small trays, tiny rites of comfort that always seem to land most when the air turns tense. Jessica leaned closer, careful not to invade, and lowered her voice. On this route, she said, we see people who step into a place because the door was open and then expect us to smile while they settle in. That is not how this works. Some areas are reserved for those who have earned them. A crisp little silence arrived, no bigger than a saucer, and sat between them. One could have set a teacup on it. Maya did not reach for her water. She kept her hands where they were, palms quiet against the armrests. She looked at Jessica as if the two of them were alone in the room, as if the soft chime of eyes and the murmured requests and the engine's steady hymn had faded to nothing. You are speaking in generalities, she said. Do you have a specific concern about me? Jessica's lashes flickered. As I said, she replied, this cabin is about fit. You know it when you see it. You feel when someone belongs and when someone does not. The words arrived mild, wrapped in cotton, and inside them something sharp waited. There was a rustle from 2 rows back where a young traveler barely more than a student, by the look of her canvas, backpack held her phone low and angled toward the aisle, not conspicuous, not secretive, simply present. Across from Maya, William adjusted his posture by a fraction, the way an attorney might angle shoulder to hear a witness more clearly. Lisa's hands opened on her lap, palms up, an unconscious gesture of trying to receive and steady what could not be easily steadied. David shifted his gaze to the bulkhead camera bubble and back to Jessica, a reminder to himself that rooms remember. Jessica's next sentence did not come out as a whisper, though it wanted to be one. It was not loud either, and yet it carried. The planes of her face said, people like you, she said, do not belong in this cabin. For a second, the air did not move. Then, as if embarrassed by its own stillness, the plane trembled lightly and steadied again. No one gasped. That would have made it gaudy. Instead, a small avalanche of glances slid down the aisle, to Maya, to Jessica, to the curtain, to the call buttons that no one pressed. The older gentleman's pencil stopped mid-letter. The blue apron attendant froze with a towel halfway to a passenger's hands. Someone cleared a throat somewhere that was not discernible. On the seat back screens, a Western hero rode a horse across a painted desert and looked noble doing it. The smell of coffee became suddenly too bright, like a song turned up one notch too far. William's phone did not move, but the red dot seemed to deepen its color. Lisa, whose work had taught her how a single sentence can live on the front page by morning, felt relief that the words had been plain. Clear language makes for clear consequences. David counted silently to 3 and thought about Marcus and what they do when truth shoves its way into the light. In the row behind, the young traveler did not lift her phone higher, did not lower it, simply kept her hands steady, perhaps thinking of friends who had told their own stories and been asked for proof. Maya did not flinch. The line of her mouth did not harden. The set of her shoulders did not change. Her eyes took in Jessica as if studying a photograph, not to judge the subject, but to understand the photographer. When she spoke, her voice retained the late-night warmth that has soothed people through storms they could not name. You have said what you mean, she murmured. It is useful to be clear. She paused long enough for the sentence to take its place. Will you put your concern in writing? In writing? Jessica repeated, startled into daylight. That is not necessary. I am trying to avoid escalation. Then please stop, Lisa said gently, surprising herself with the softness of her own tone. Let people travel. Jessica's eyes flicked to Lisa and away. She straightened by a measurable inch, smoothed the front of her uniform as if the fabric had offended her, and reached again for the clipboard that had made its earlier appearance. We will proceed simply, she said. I will note a verification check in the log. If you would initial here just initials, we can avoid confusion later. It is standard. William's brow creased. I do not believe it is, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. The way a person might remark to a window that rain looks like snow if you squint. The older gentleman with the crossword lowered his pencil and placed his palm over the page as if he were saving a word for later. David, at last, pressed the call button, then changed his mind and pressed it again to turn it off. The light blinked, considered, and went dark. Small acts, all of them. But in small rooms, small acts matter. Jessica held the clipboard nearer to Maya. A simple initial, she said. We can be done. Maya looked not at the paper, but at the face that offered it. The voice that answered could have been broadcast through a midnight hour on an old radio with a dial that crackled when turned. You have my documents, she said. You have my cooperation. You have now used language that is clear enough for anyone to understand. She lifted her hand, not to take the pen, but to rest her fingertips on the edge of her tray, as though counting beats of a song. The plane slid through a pocket of air and rose half an inch in the stomach of every person aboard before settling again into its calm. Maya's eyes softened, not with forgiveness, but with a resolve that was not loud and did not need to be. If you want to verify, be ready to see the whole truth. The warning from a few minutes earlier set between them like a marker on the map no one could pretend not to see, and yet Jessica pressed forward as if erasing lines would redraw the ground. The cabin had the hush of a late afternoon library. The light through the windows turned warm and syrupy, and the air carried the faint, steady aroma of coffee and citrus from warm towels. At 30,000 feet, the plane felt less like a machine and more like a room lifted gently into the sky. Passengers resumed their small rituals folding blankets, adjusting reading lights, taking slow sips, and all those ordinary motions made the extraordinary tension at 1A stand out the way a sharp note rings inside a soft song. Maya sat with her hands resting evenly on the armrests, her posture collected, her voice from moments ago still echoing in memory. If verification was the path, then truth would arrive in full, not in fragment. Jessica hovered at the aisle edge with a clipboard she did not need. Her smile gone, her jaw set, the posture of someone who preferred procedure when grace might have done. The older couple in row 2 spoke about grilled corn and lemonade for Independence Day and fell gradually silent as they sensed weather that did not come from clouds. William in 2A angled his shoulder a degree toward the aisle, not to intrude, only to register that fairness had a witness. Lisa in 3B set her tablet aside, fingers laced loosely as if her hands meant to keep a promise to patience. And David in 3C looked from face to face, the way an investor reads a room when numbers stop talking and only character remains. In the galley, the clink of porcelain sharpened briefly and then softened, as if even cups understood when to whisper. Jessica leaned in the smallest measure, clipboard suspended like a prop that had outlived its scene. Here's what we will do, she said, tone cool and carefully measured. To avoid confusion, I will move you to another seat while I speak with the supervisor. It is nothing personal, it simply keeps first class orderly. Maya's reply could have been broadcast on the old radio at midnight, warm and precise enough to keep a trucker awake on a long straight highway. Thank you, she said, but this is my seat. She did not raise her voice. She did not raise anything that could be construed as a challenge, and somehow that calm was the most unanswerable refusal in the world. Jessica's eyes ticked to the empty space at the bulkhead as if a solution might be written there, then back. We have a policy about maintaining standards, she said, each word wrapped in cotton and hiding a small stone. When someone is not a fit, it affects the experience for everyone. The phrase not a fit asked to be ignored and could not be. A blue-aproned attendant emerged with a carafe and paused, eyes flicking between the two women, then turned the carafe slightly so hot liquid would not slosh, as though control could be poured. A few phones lifted not high, not brazen just enough to capture the texture of the moment, the way a reporter notes down the weather because it tells the truth about the mood of the town. A young traveler with a canvas backpack in row 4 held her device steady at thigh level. Screen dimmed, the lens pointed toward the aisle. Small acts, quiet and lawful, like turning on a lamp in a dim room. Jessica shifted her weight, one polished shoe forward, the other braced as if the carpet were a shoreline. Stand up, she said softly, the words rounded like pebbles and not any less hard for it. I will escort you to another section. The sentence did not invite, It placed. Maya studied the attendant's face with the steadiness of a portrait sitter. Time seemed to thin and slow as if the plane had entered a pocket of still air. No, she answered. The syllable, a breath, and a boundary. The clipboard rose a fraction, then fell back against Jessica's palm. You are making this difficult, she said. We could do this quietly. From 2A came William's voice, level as an oath, taken with a hand on a book. She has shown you everything you asked for. He did not add counselor instincts or the word record. He did not need to. Lisa's voice followed, pitched low, neighborly, the way a person might ask a stranger in a diner to pass the sugar and thereby stop an argument. We can let people travel in peace. Jessica did not turn toward either of them. She stood entirely still for a count of 2, then said to Maya, You will stand now, each word thin and flat, like something hammered under too much pressure. The aisle lights drew a pale path to the forward galley. No one moved. The seatbelt sign chimed once as the plane rode a shallow swell and smoothed again, a reminder that not everything that rises intends to disturb. In that breath, Jessica reached, not for the clipboard or the pen or the interphone, but for certainty. Her hand came forward in a quick, decisive arc, an instant dressed as authority, and struck Maya's cheek with the flat of her palm. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The sound carried only as far as the nearest row and then farther because of what it meant. Maya's head turned a fraction with the force and then returned to center. She did not touch her face. She did not gasp. She inhaled quietly and exhaled in the same measure, as if steady breath were the only instrument left to her and she intended to play it true. The cabin reacted the way civilized rooms do when someone breaks a rule that never needed to be written. A hush widened and deepened. A glass chimed on a tray table. A newspaper stilled under a palm. A passenger said, Oh my God, under his breath, the syllables barely air. Another said, That is not right. The words placed, not thrown. 2 phones rose higher by a thumb's width, lenses steady. The blue apron attendant froze and then took a single step back, carafe held safely away, as if even coffee ought not witness this up close. From economy came a child's short laugh that stopped on its own, unaware it had wandered into a fragile place. Jessica stood with her hands suspended, a heartbeat longer than she should have, the body's way of confessing before the mind does. Then she lowered it and found a story to cover the moment. You have been non-compliant, she said, not to Maya, not to anyone in particular, but to the cabin and whatever power it might grant her. I am responsible for the integrity of this section. The word integrity sounded narrower than it used to. Maya turned her eyes, only her eyes, and regarded the attendant with a calm that made listeners forget there was any other way to answer cruelty but without heat. You have chosen, she said, and the entire cabin heard the sentence decide not to add more. A hush with a new weight settled over the seats. The ritual of service tried to continue and could not. An older gentleman folded his crossword as if closing a small door against a draft. Lisa made the smallest movement, sliding her hands apart on her lap to uncurl her fingers. David looked at the bulkhead camera bubble again and felt, with an investor's certainty, that rooms remember and that memory has a way of appearing where people can see it. In the rows behind, a whisper threaded from one mouth to another, not gossip but the first line in a communal account. Did you see? Did you hear? Did you get it? Phones did what phones do in a country where witnessing has become its own kind of service. Without naming a platform, without hashtags shouted like headlines, the network began to ripple. A message left the plane in a thin beam of data and found another phone and then another. Images, shaky but faithful, started their journey outward. In the newsroom somewhere, a producer's screen lit with an alert that did not yet have words attached to it. In a living room in a far-off time zone, a daughter showed her mother a clip and said softly, Listen. The plane itself went on, steady, impartial, cutting a clean westward line through air that had not consented to be part of a story and was part of it anyway. Jessica drew a breath that sounded like someone preparing to say the official thing and announced, For safety, I am going to relocate this passenger. The sentence was large and vague and asked to be obeyed. William's voice arrived again, no louder than before, carrying the ease of someone who believed in rules because he believed in the people they were meant to protect. For safety, he said, it is best to stop making this worse. The words landed like a cushion placed where something hard might have struck. Maya did not stand. She did not argue. She kept her spine tall and her hands still and seemed, somehow, to lower the temperature of the room by refusing to feed it heat. In the row behind, the young traveler whispered, Keep the frame steady. Not to anyone in particular, perhaps to herself. A father across the aisle drew a blanket higher over his daughter's knees and said in a tone that was both apology and instruction, Close your eyes, honey, and then did not close his own. The blue apron attendant set the carafe carefully on a tray and pressed her hands flat against the counter, looking there at the stainless steel that reflected nothing useful. Jessica's face changed in small ways only someone looking closely could chart. A confidence slid sideways, an expression hardened, and then attempted to soften and did not quite make it back. Maya finally spoke, A single sentence placed with the care one uses to set glass on a fragile table. You have drawn the line yourself, she said. The rest will be clear. It was not a threat. It was a forecast. Outside the window, the wind cut through a column of light and left it whole. Sunlight did not shatter for anyone. In the small pause that followed, the hum of the engine sounded louder than it had moments before, as if the machine wanted to take responsibility for the noise so the people would not have to. Jessica's hand went to the small radio clip at her waist. Her thumb hovered above the push-to-talk button. She seemed to weigh whether procedure would save her from what had already happened. The clipboard dipped, then rose. She looked at the curtain, at the call-light panel, at the silent faces of passengers who had mastered the American art of witnessing without interfering until interference became a duty. In that held moment, a voice entered the aisle from the rear of the cabin, firm and unhurried, the vowels clean, the consonants certain, a voice trained to be both ordinary and authoritative at the same time. A voice of a man from the back. Federal here. I am Air Marshal Harris. Air Marshal Daniel Harris moved with the steadiness of someone who had practiced calm until it fit like a uniform. He stepped into the space between the seat and the galley, nodding once to Jessica Miller, once to the passengers nearest the aisle, then rested his attention on Maya Johnson. The cabin had the stillness that follows a lightning strike, a hush that is not quiet so much as attention holding its breath. The light through the windows had turned the color of late honey, coffee and warm towels had left a clean citrus note in the air. Far below, the Midwest rolled by in square miles of field and river. But up here the room felt self-contained, a story sealed inside aluminum and sky. I appreciate everyone's patience, Harris said, his voice even, the consonants unhurried. Ma'am, he added to Maya, are you all right? He studied her face for signs of harm and found dignity instead, the kind that refuses to be defined by insult. Jessica angled herself so that she intercepted the conversation, shoulders squared as if to catch a ball that might otherwise sail past. Officer, she said, smoothing the syllables, I have a non-compliant passenger in the first-class seat. For safety and the integrity of the cabin, I need her relocated. I have asked repeatedly. Harris looked from Jessica to Maya, from Maya to the nearby rows. He registered the phones held low, not hidden, the quiet heat in the eyes of the witnesses, the old gentleman with the folded crossword, the blue-aproned attendant at the galley, hands flat on the counter as if it were a rail on a moving ship. He nodded once. Ma'am, he said to Maya, do you have identification and your boarding pass available? The question was procedural. The tone made it a courtesy. They have been provided, Maya answered, late-night radio calm. You are welcome to see them again. She opened her wallet and set the documents on the tray table with care, one beside the other. Boarding pass, government identification, a loyalty card whose metal edge caught the light. Harris examined each item with the focus of a man who knew that small mistakes compound at altitude. Everything matched. The name, the seat, the itinerary. He returned the items and shifted his attention to Jessica. You have seen these already? Papers are not the whole story, Jessica replied, keeping her voice low, polished. We are trained to read fit. On crowded holiday routes, people slip into places they have not earned. I was preventing a scene. There's already a scene, William Carter said from 2A. The line dry and not unkind. He did not add the word counselor. The tone supplied it. Lisa Brown's hands remained open on her lap, a careful, public stillness. David Thompson did not speak. His gaze moved between Harris and Maya, weighing the kind of choice numbers cannot resolve. Harris inclined his head, as if acknowledging the truth of what William had said and the cost of arriving at it. Ma'am, he asked Maya, did she strike you? Yes, Maya said. No heat, no embroidery. A single word made of fact. Jessica's smile returned, tight as a bow on a box you do not intend to open. She was refusing a lawful instruction. I acted to prevent further disruption. A soft turbulence passed through the cabin, a rise and fall like a breath taken and released. The seatbelt sign gave a single chime and went still. Harris anchored himself lightly with one hand on the aisle seat back. He did not raise his voice. He did not change his posture. He let the authority sit in the way he looked at people and the way he named things. Ma'am, he said to Jessica, you will step back for a moment. She did not move. A heartbeat later she did, half a step, the body obeying before the story caught up. Maya reached into the side pocket of her coat and removed a slim folder and a badge in a leather case. The folder was not theatrical. Paper seldom island. She placed both items on the tray table with the attention one might give to setting a glass on an heirloom table. Before we go any farther, she said, let us be clear about roles. The room leaned in without moving. The badge was simple. Name, photograph, and the quiet seal of Liberty Aerospace. The folder, when opened, revealed a summary page for a Federal Security Services agreement language dense and dry, numbers, spelled in words, the kind of document that has the weight of a bridge you do not see until you drive across it. Harris recognized the insignia first, then the contract header, then the title beside her name. His face did not change much. It did not need to. He understood. Maya's voice stayed warm, steady, broadcast-friendly. I am the person who signed the security agreement worth $2 billion with the United States government, she said. And I am being insulted by an employee of a partner carrier in the section of the aircraft her company promises to manage with professionalism. She did not look at Jessica on the last word. She looked at Harris, and then, for a short, deliberate moment, at the passengers who had become custodians of the truce. By the simple act of paying attention, Jessica's breath caught. It was small, but the room heard it. Anyone can say, she began, then saw the badge again, the contract header again, the kind of proof that does not shout because it does not have to. William let out a low sound, not laughter and not disbelief, something in between the noise a person makes when the floor turns out to be a door. Lisa closed her eyes for a heartbeat, relief passing over her face like a shadow moving across a field. David leaned back an inch, the body's version of a ledger balancing. Harris straightened. Miss Johnson, he said, and the name was now a title. You will remain seated. Miss Miller, you will step to the galley and keep your hands where I can see them. He did not reach for cuffs, he reached for clarity. Service will pause. The blue apron attendant nodded, grateful to be told to do nothing. The old gentleman with the crossword folded his paper again, a reflex now, as if the act itself were polite applause for order restored. Jessica stood in the narrow galley mouth, shoulders squared, but the set had become a brace. You said you were preventing a scene, Harris continued, the radio in his voice tuned to an even channel. You created one. You cited integrity. You violated it. You referenced fit. You failed it. He allowed a beat. And if you are considering a story to tell later, you should know that there are multiple witnesses, and he did not look at the phones. He did not need to. Sufficient documentation. 只申的法. I asked for cooperation, Jessica said, thin-voiced, arguing not with him, but with what it would mean if she stopped. You received it, Harris answered. Repeatedly, he nodded toward the tray table with the documents and the badge. You received more than most people would have offered under insult. Maya's calm did not waver. She did not gloat. She did not explain. She let the room do that for her. Across the aisle, a father tucked a blanket a little higher over his daughter's legs. The child slept through the moment in the way children do, unaware of how close and far the world can be at the same time. At the rear of first class, the young traveler with the canvas backpack kept her phone steady, hands composed around it like someone holding a candle in a draft. Harris touched the small radio at his belt. He spoke a few quiet words into it that neither boasted nor apologized. He gave a quick, professional nod to the cockpit curtain, then turned to the passengers. We appreciate your patience, he said again. And the simple repetition soothed something. To Maya, softer, is there anything you need right now? I need the flight to continue, Maya said. I need people to be safe, and I need the record to be honest. It will be, Harris said. A hush settled that was no longer silence, but relief, pulling a chair closer to the table. The blue apron attendant asked, with a voice that had regained its gentleness, if anyone would like water. Several accepted. William, practiced at closing circles, murmured, thank you, to no one in particular, and to everyone involved. Lisa exhaled something like a prayer, something like a business plan that had finally found its missing page. David studied Jessica for a moment, not unkindly, and then let his attention return to the window where the country drifted past in rectangles and rivers. Jessica's eyes went to the folder, as if she could will it to be fiction. She tucked her chin and stared at the galley floor, searching in its faint pattern for a map out of the room. There was none. She looked up as she began, then stopped, the word slipping away like a fish from a hand. She stood still, inventorying choices, denial, apology, retreat. None of them changed the fact that the story had been told already, and not by her. Maya reached for the folder and the badge and returned them to the tote, the gesture unhurried, ceremonious without ceremony. The act said nothing to prove, nothing to hide. She lifted her glass of water and took a measured sip. The ring of condensation on the tray table remained, a small, perfect circle evidence that something cool had sat in a warm room and refused to be warm. Harris addressed her once more. When we land, there will be a process, he said. I will make sure that you are informed at every step. I expect the process, she answered. And I expect that the people who saw what they saw will not be asked to forget it. They will not, he said. The plane carried on. The route map crept a small measured distance west. The afternoon tilted toward evening. The wing flashed and dimmed as the sun found its angles. Somewhere below a river bent like a question mark. In the aisle, conversations restarted in the tentative way of voices learning to trust a room again. A man asked for decaf. The attendant brought it. A woman requested a blanket. The attendant unfolded it like a promise and laid it across her knees. Courtesy returned to work, and the work suited it. Jessica remained at the galley mouth, caught between the wish to be necessary and the truth of having been harmful. She adjusted the cuff of her sleeve. She straightened a stack of cups that did not need straightening. Her face tried on expressions that did not fit. Indignation, grievance, indifference. None of them landed. The posture of someone who has spent years believing that rules were on her side gave way to the posture of someone learning that rules, properly kept, stand with the people they were made to protect. Maya glanced toward the aisle and found Harris' eyes. He gave a small not-nothing ceremonial. Only recognition passing between two people who had met at the line where conflict becomes decision. She returned the nod, then folded her hands and looked out at the sky. Her reflection faint in the window, a woman seated where she had been assigned, where she belonged, not by grace or exception, but by right. The cabin's bell broke all at once and gently, like a song easing from the chorus into a verse. Somewhere mid-cabin, a phone chimed the bright domestic sound that had nothing to do with authority and everything to do with how people live. A passenger lifted the device, blinked, and turned the screen just enough that the nearest rows could see. The letters were large, the banner unmistakable. A phone chime sounded in the cabin. The screen lit. Trending number discrimination on Delta. 200,000 tweets. The wheels found the runway with a soft thrum, and the cabin exhaled as if everyone had been holding a single, shared breath. Los Angeles spread itself beneath the wings in long sunlit ribbons of freeway and the shimmer of rooftops, the mountains standing back like patient chaperones. The tannoy offered the playing music of arrival, and seatbelts clicked in polite echo. In first class, people reached for jackets, for tote bags, for the small order of their own lives. The story that had climbed the western sky with them had not stayed put. It had traveled ahead on small screens, a quiet tide of witnessing that now lapped at the gates of the airport. From the window seats came the gloss of palm trees and the bright spokes of service vehicles. The jet bridge edged toward the door with the dignity of something that has done one job over and over and knows it matters. Before the chime permitted anyone to stand, a uniformed figure waited at the threshold, and behind her, more uniforms in a careful line. The first face belonged to Rebecca Torres, whose badge said what her posture already had, Federal Bureau of Investigation. She stepped aboard as if entering a room of friends who might be startled to see her but would be grateful she had come. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice the kind that has learned to quiet rooms without raising itself. "Please remain seated for a moment." She spoke to the cabin, to the story, to the air that hummed with attention. "Miss Johnson," she added, and, in saying the name, placed respect precisely where it belonged. "Are you in need of medical assistance?" Maya turned slightly in her seat. The cheek that had taken the blow held only the faintest shadow now, a suggestion of red that could have been warmth from the sun. She shook her head once. "I am well," she said, and in those three words declared what some people choose each morning when the world tests their balance: dignity as a daily practice. Rebecca's gaze moved from Maya to the galley. Jessica Miller stood there, hands at her sides, the set of someone who had not yet translated consequences into the words that would describe them. Air Marshal Daniel Harris remained near the forward rows, a steady hinge between order and the promise of it. He offered Rebecca a small, professional nod. She replied with one of her own. Her eyes took in the witnesses without lingering. The older gentleman with the folded crossword, William Carter, whose steady calm had the feeling of oaths, Lisa Brown with her open hands, David Thompson with his thoughtful frown. The blue-aproned attendant held the counter the way a person holds a pew, for steadiness and for grace. "Miss Miller," Rebecca said, turning toward the galley. "Step forward, please." The words were not cruel. They did not need to be. Jessica came into the aisle with the mechanical poise of someone following a script that had suddenly turned into evidence. Rebecca recited rights in the voice that made sense of each sentence. The rhythm was old and careful, the language heavy and necessary. The small click of restraint sounded almost delicate against the hum of the aircraft. No one applauded. Civility does not clap for itself. It returns to work. The jet bridge kissed the door with a seal. Outside, a small constellation of vehicles waited, not flashing, simply there. Officers, whose job it is to be ordinary in extraordinary moments, stood at ease and at attention at the same time. Through the porthole, the sky looked like it would not understand any of this, and that felt right. Outside of stories, sky is just sky. Rebecca addressed Maya once more. "There will be statements," she said. "There will be a process. You will not be asked to walk through any of it alone." The softness in her voice belonged to a person who has lived with the difference between procedure and care. "I understand," Maya answered. "I ask only that the record remain honest." "It will," Rebecca said. When the chime finally sang, the cabin rose with more grace than a crowd usually musters. William found his jacket, then turned to Maya and said, "Pitch low and sure. If you need counsel, I am happy to help." It was the offer of a neighbor more than of a profession. Lisa placed a business card on the corner of the tray table and added, "I have contacts at newspapers that still love facts." David pressed his lips together, a smile that held no cheer and plenty of solidarity. The young traveler with the canvas backpack slipped her phone into her pocket and managed a tiny nod that carried the weight of a promise. The footage is safe. They filed out into the jet bridge light. Air smelled of hot tarmac and coffee from a nearby kiosk. That singular airport blend of practical and human. At the top of the bridge, an airline manager waited with a plastic smile trying to become real. He opened his mouth and then thought better of greeting. Beside him, 2 officers in airport police blue stepped back to make space for the federal team. Courtesy stood in the small ways it can. A door held, a path cleared, the quiet of people deciding not to speak when speech would add nothing. The gate area had gathered its own audience. People lifted hats from paper bags and from crossword puzzles. A toddler pointed at the open door and asked a question his father answered with a hush and a pat on the shoulder. Farther down the concourse, a cup-framed in stainless steel and glass poured coffee in a measured line. A jar for tips stood beside the register, the bills inside soft with having been folded and unfolded. Someone in a baseball cap held a newspaper whose masthead belonged to the whole country, and on its front were the kinds of words that find their way to mantelpieces and arguments and the spaces between families. When Maya stepped into the terminal, microphones did not leap so much as lean in. The crowd did not roar. It breathed. A cluster of cameras, dense as a bouquet, waited near a velvet rope that had been arranged to look like order. A producer spoke into a headset. A cameraman checked focus and then checked his footing. Someone with a pen and a pad lifted both as if to catch rain. Rebecca stood a little to the side, neither guarding Maya nor abandoning her. Harris near enough to steady the picture and far enough to let it be itself. A journalist asked for comment in a voice trained to thread needles. Maya did not hurry to answer. She looked at the people and at the lights and at the space past them where families met and bags rolled, and a girl in a denim jacket waved at the grandmother in a cardigan, the color of winter clouds. She found the old gentleman with the crossword, now seated by the window, and the sight of him touched something like a chord. She lifted the microphone with both hands, lightly, as if it were fragile. Justice does not fly in any class. It belongs to everyone. She said it the way a person says grace, not for effect, but because there is a meal and a table, and people gathered, and giving thanks is part of the ritual that keeps us from forgetting what we owe one another. The words moved out through the cameras and the phones and the pens as if they had been waiting for this lane all day. Heads nodded. Some eyes closed for a brief second. It is a rare gift to hear a sentence and know it will be repeated with honor by strangers. Questions followed, as they will, about policy and training and who would apologize to whom and when. Maya answered what she could and left unsaid what belonged to lawyers and to time. She did not speak for the airline. She did not speak for the government. She spoke for a traveler who had bought a seat and kept it when asked not to, for a citizen who had endured a minute of insult and turned it into a turning. When someone asked whether she feared backlash, she smiled in a way that belonged on radios at midnight and in kitchens on Sunday mornings. I believe in the record, she said. It was kept today. I see. Rebecca touched her elbow lightly to indicate that the path through the terminal would now become practical. The federal team formed a patient bubble around them, and together they walked past the gate where a family waited with a hand letter sign, past a gift shop where magazines with glossy covers smiled at no one in particular, past a view of planes lining up like large, well-behaved birds. Outside the glass, the sun made a show of late afternoon. Inside, time felt honest again. News spread the way it does, in crescents and spirals, from mouth to mouth and screen to screen. In living rooms far away, grandparents sat forward with their elbows on their knees and said, "Listen," and their grown children did. In diners where the coffee never cools and waitresses call regulars by name, televisions above the counter showed a woman at an airport speaking softly and a caption that made strangers agree out loud. In police stations and union halls and offices where policy becomes breakfast conversation, people looked up and looked at one another with faces that asked the same question. Will we do better now? By evening, statements were drafted and redrafted in clean fonts, some speaking plainly, some cloaking regret in conditions. By night, lawyers put folders on the right corners of their desks. By morning, the city wore the light of a brand new day as if it had not known the dark. Maya woke early, as she always did when travel bent the hours. She made coffee in a room that looked like every hotel room and none of them. And while the kettle whispered up to a boil, she glanced at the strip of paper that had been slid under the door. She unfolded the newspaper and smoothed the crease with her palm. The headline sat above the fold like a verdict and a promise. A single slap shook American aviation. Wei? The memory of that landing in Los Angeles lingers like the soft hush after him, not because of the noise made, but because of the silence that followed. A woman who had been doubted, insulted, and even struck chose not to answer with fury, but with calm, clarity, and in that moment she carried more weight than any title could hold. The lesson is simple and enduring. Prejudice may raise its voice, but truth and dignity, when spoken plainly, will always carry further. For those who remember marches, trials, and neighborhood struggles, It is another reminder that justice grows slowly but surely when ordinary people choose to witness and stand firm. Like a porch light glowing quietly in the dark, a single act of courage can guide us all toward a safer, kinder home. Take a breath, look around at the lives that have crossed with yours, and if this story has touched you, consider passing that warmth along to someone still waiting in the shadows.